The Arkansas morning sun had barely broken through the haze when Caleb Morgan pulled his old John Deere into the northeastern edge of his farmland, the one corner he'd never dared touch. The soil here looked the same as the rest, cracked, dry, and bone-colored from the months-long drought. But this patch held a different kind of weight, one not written in crop reports or bank statements. It was family warning, verbal folklore passed down from his grandfather and reinforced by his father in hushed tones that always ended the same way. "You don't plow that side of the field, son. Just don't." But warnings don't pay bills. Caleb, 62, wore age on him like his favorite denim jacket, worn thin, sun-faded, but still holding together. The Morgan farm had been in his family for 4 generations, established just after the Civil War by men tougher and maybe more desperate than he was now. The last few years had been hell, late frost, an invasive species of beetles, and debt that seemed to grow faster than any crop he could plant. He wasn't proud of what he was about to do, but sometimes survival meant pushing past old ghost stories. So when the blade of his disc plow hit something that jolted the entire tractor and sent a metallic clang echoing through the silence, Caleb instinctively killed the engine and climbed down. The air was still and thick, the kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat feel loud. He walked over to the furrow, boots squelching in the dew-soaked clay. The glint of something metal peeked through the churned earth. Kneeling, he brushed it off. What emerged wasn't rock. It wasn't pipe. It was a corner, an old, rust-pitted iron corner, the green oxidation staining the soil around it. As he dug further with his hands, shapes began to reveal themselves, metal bands, a corroded handle, and on one side, barely visible beneath grime and age, a military insignia. Faded, ornate, Union. He muttered under his breath, "Well, I'll be damned." The thing was too big to pull out by hand, so he fetched a shovel from the back of the tractor and began working around the edges. His hands, calloused from decades of pruning peach trees and fixing broken irrigation lines, trembled as he cleared away dirt. With each layer gone, the mystery deepened. This wasn't some rusty toolbox or discarded farm gear. It was a full-blown military chest. By the time he got it loose, the sun had cleared the trees and started baking the sweat onto his brow. He strained, but managed to hoist it onto his utility trailer with a grunt and a whispered prayer that he didn't throw out his back. That's when Tommy showed up. "Uncle Caleb, you findin' Civil War treasure or what?" the teen called out, grinning from the shade of the barn. Tommy Ray, 17 and glued to his phone more often than not, was in town for the summer. City kid. Smart as hell, though. Tech whiz. His parents, Caleb's niece and her husband, had sent him down from Little Rock to get some dirt under his nails. Caleb just pointed to the chest. "Give me a hand, would you?" Tommy jogged over, pulling his phone out as he walked. "Oh man, this is sick. We should totally record this. TikTok's gonna lose its mind." "Just help me get it inside first," Caleb said, shaking his head. They rolled the chest into the old equipment shed, half barn, half graveyard of tools and parts that hadn't been used since Reagan was in office. Caleb cleared a table and laid the chest down. It was heavy, but not as heavy as he'd expected. Not full of ammo or cannonballs. That meant something. He didn't know what yet, but his gut was whispering truths his brain couldn't yet decipher. "Dude," Tommy said, still filming, "this thing looks like it's from a movie, like National Treasure meets Duck Dynasty." "Turn that off," Caleb muttered, his tone flat. "But I said turn it off." Tommy complied with a sigh, but not before the video had already been uploaded to his account under the title, "Farmer Digs Up Civil War Mystery." Caleb sat on the edge of a nearby stool, wiping the sweat from his brow, staring at the chest. He hadn't opened it yet. He could feel the weight of it, more than just metal. This thing was old, meant to stay buried. He could feel it in the back of his teeth, but he also couldn't look away. That night, long after dinner, a can of beans for Caleb, leftover pizza for Tommy, they both lay awake in separate rooms of the farmhouse. The air outside buzzed with cicadas, but there was something else riding the wind too, something quieter, heavier. Caleb had just turned off the lamp by his bedside when he noticed it. Through the window, a light. It flickered in the distance, just past the orchard, near the edge of the field, the one where the chest had been found. Not a flashlight, not a lantern. It moved too fast for either, like a beam of light scanning. He got out of bed, pulled on his boots, and grabbed his shotgun. Not because he expected trouble, but because on land like this, you always come prepared. By the time he stepped outside, the light was gone, but the feeling in his chest told him plain as day. Whatever he had uncovered, it hadn't gone unnoticed. The sun was climbing high by the time Caleb Morgan wheeled the rusted chest into the old equipment barn. Dust floated lazily in the shafts of light, filtering through warped wooden slats. The air was thick with the smell of dry hay, motor oil, and a faint metallic tang that seemed to follow the chest like a ghost. Caleb parked the dolly and stood staring at it, hands on hips, sweat glistening on his temples. The thing looked like it had been through hell and back. Battered iron corners, oxidized latches, and a heavy lock that screamed military issue. Tommy Ray bounced into the barn, still clutching his phone like a prized trout. "Uncle Caleb, I've already got 500 views on the video. Some dude commented it might be an old war chest. You think there's treasure inside?" Caleb shot him a glance, half amused, half concerned. "I think we need to be real careful about what we're dealing with." He knelt beside the chest, brushing away the last clumps of clay. There was an insignia stamped into the iron faceplate, a faded star encircled by eagle wings. Not Confederate, that was for sure, and not Union standard issue either. Something different, something special. After a moment's hesitation, he reached into the tool cabinet and pulled out a crowbar. "Stand back," he said. With a grunt and a practiced flick of the wrist, honed by decades of prying open rusted gates and busted toolboxes, Caleb jammed the bar under the lip of the latch. It took 3 hard yanks and a muttered curse before the old mechanism gave way with a shriek of metal. The lid creaked open, slow and dramatic, like something out of a movie. Inside, everything was strangely well-preserved, nestled in faded blue cloth that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. On top lay a weathered journal bound in thick leather, its cover embossed with the initials S.W. Beneath that, a set of yellowed papers folded into quarters, a rolled parchment map, secured with a silk ribbon, and, to Caleb's astonishment, a velvet pouch that jingled softly with unmistakable weight. He reached for the journal first, flipping it open to a page that bore careful handwriting in dark brown ink. The letters still crisp, after what had to be over a century and a half. March 3rd, 1865. The plan is in motion. By God's grace and Lincoln's confidence, we may end this war with one final act. The blue moon must rise in silence and fall in secrecy. S.W. Blue moon, Caleb whispered, his brow furrowing. Tommy peered over his shoulder. "Is that like a code name or something?" Could be a whole lot more. They spent the next 2 hours unpacking the contents slowly and deliberately. The map, once unfurled, showed the layout of Cotton Hollow and the surrounding counties, but not as it looked now. This was a Civil War-era survey, complete with troop positions, supply depots, and hand-drawn annotations. A bold red circle marked the northeastern corner of the Morgan farm, the exact spot where Caleb had struck the chest. Next came the bundle of letters. Each was folded precisely, sealed with a black wax emblem in the shape of a crescent moon. Caleb broke the seal on the first letter and began to read aloud, "To whomever finds this chest, know that the contents you hold are a matter of national consequence. This operation was never written into official records. If you are reading this, it means the truth has remained buried far longer than intended. Trust no one until you know who they really serve. Colonel Silas Whitmore." Caleb exhaled slowly, heart pounding in his chest. Silas Whitmore. The name rang a bell, but only vaguely. Probably something Evelyn had mentioned in passing, during one of her long-winded history rants at the dinner table. He silently wished she were here now. If anyone could piece this together, it'd have been her. Inside the velvet pouch, they found 10 gleaming coins, real gold, heavy, with Union Eagle markings and the year 1864 engraved beneath. Caleb felt a chill despite the humid air. This wasn't some collector's stash. This was a time capsule, left here on purpose, sealed with intention. Tommy took a step back, wide-eyed. Uncle Caleb, this ain't just old junk. This is some next-level conspiracy stuff. I mean, secret maps, military codes, gold coins. You realize how wild this is, right? I'm starting to, Caleb said, his voice low, and I don't think this is just about money. They spent the rest of the afternoon cataloging everything, documenting as best they could with Tommy's phone. Caleb insisted they keep the chest in the barn, hidden under a tarp for now. He didn't trust locking it in the house, not with what they'd just seen. That night, long after Tommy had gone to bed, Caleb sat alone in his kitchen, the journal open in front of him. He reread the passage again and again. The blue moon must rise in silence and fall in secrecy. He turned a few pages forward and froze when he saw a detailed diagram of what appeared to be an explosives cache. A crude but unmistakable schematic showing placement of charges, ignition mechanisms, and timing notes. The location: a Confederate munitions stockpile 2 counties over. There was a scrawled margin note: "Blame must fall on Southern sabotage. No Union fingerprints." Damn, Caleb muttered under his breath. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to rewrite how it ended. As he reached for another page, something outside caught his eye, a flicker of light at the edge of the fields. He stood, walked to the back door, and opened it slowly. The night air was still, but in the distance, beyond the rows of corn, a pale blue glow hovered low to the ground, like headlights without a car. It shimmered for a moment, then vanished. Caleb squinted, jaw tight. "Ain't no foxfire glowing like that," he muttered. He stepped out onto the porch and lit a cigarette, staring into the dark. Something was happening, something bigger than buried treasure or family legacy. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Morgan felt like the world was moving under his feet. The clock in the hallway struck 2:17 a.m. when Caleb Morgan shot upright in bed, heart thudding like a war drum. At first, he thought it had been a dream, a fleeting echo of cannon fire, or some half-buried memory stirred by the discovery of the Civil War chest. But the creak of old wood beneath boots brought him to full alert. Someone was in the barn. He swung his legs over the side of the bed and reached for the shotgun he kept beneath it, a habit formed not from paranoia, but from practicality. Cotton Hollow might have been a speck on the map, but even specks had their share of trouble after dark. Moving slowly through the darkened hallway, Caleb passed the framed photograph of Evelyn near the staircase. Her eyes, caught in the flash of moonlight spilling through the window, seemed to watch him, calm and knowing. The night air was thick and damp as he stepped onto the porch. Crickets fell silent. He crept across the gravel path, boots crunching ever so softly, and circled around the side of the house. The barn loomed ahead, its sliding doors slightly ajar. One of them rocked gently in the breeze, except there was no wind. He raised the shotgun. "Who's in there?" he called, voice steady despite the tremor beneath his skin. No answer, just the rustle of hay. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows inside the barn. The man wore military fatigues, but they were like none Caleb had seen. Modern cut, but weathered with age. No name patch, no division tag, no flag. Just a blank, almost spectral presence. His face was obscured by a brimmed hat, his movements eerily fluid, as if he belonged to another time. Caleb froze. "This is private property," he warned. The figure stopped, turned his head slightly, acknowledging Caleb, but didn't speak. Then, just as suddenly, he backed into the shadows and disappeared. No footsteps, no sound, just gone. Caleb remained rooted for a long moment, the silence of the night pressing in like a weight on his chest. Finally, he lowered the shotgun and stepped into the barn. Nothing. The chest was still there, covered now with a tarp, undisturbed. He didn't sleep the rest of the night. At first light, Caleb was sipping coffee at the kitchen table, replaying the night over and over in his head when Tommy Ray came bounding in. "You see this?" Tommy held up his phone, excitement glowing in his face. "The TikTok's at 12,000 views. Folks are saying it's a hoax, but some think we found real Civil War gold." Caleb didn't answer. He just stared out the window, jaw clenched. "What's wrong, Grandpa?" "We had a visitor last night." Tommy's grin faded. "What kind of visitor?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "The kind that don't leave footprints." conversation was cut short by the low rumble of tires on gravel. Caleb stood and stepped to the door. Down the driveway, flanked by morning mist, came 3 black SUVs, windows tinted, no license plates. He didn't have to be told who they were. He could feel it. The vehicles came to a slow stop in front of the house. The lead car's driver's side door opened. A woman stepped out. Tall, fit, mid-40s, hair pulled into a severe bun. She wore a charcoal suit and mirrored sunglasses. No smile, no badge. "Mr. Morgan?" Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. "I'm Agent Madeline Rhodes. We need to speak with you about an item on your property." Caleb crossed his arms. "You mean the rickety old chest that just happened to be buried for 150 years? That one?" Her tone didn't change. "We need to access it. Immediately." "Why?" Caleb asked, his voice hard as sun-baked clay. Agent Rhodes hesitated, clearly not used to being challenged. "That information is classified." "Then I reckon the chest is too." Behind her, 2 more agents stepped out of the second SUV. They stood at a calculated distance, not close enough to be threatening, not far enough to be dismissed. Caleb's fingers twitched at his sides. He glanced toward the barn. Tommy followed his gaze. Rhodes took a slow step forward. "Mr. Morgan, I'm authorized by the United States government to retrieve sensitive materials. What you uncovered may pertain to national security." "Then maybe the government ought to start by explaining what in hell was buried on my family's land." A long pause stretched between them, heavy and tense. Rhodes finally spoke, her voice low. "You don't know what you're sitting on, Mr. Morgan. That chest was part of an unsanctioned operation lost to history for a reason. If its contents become public, it could rewrite more than just family stories. It could unravel narratives that have held for generations." Caleb stared at her. "That's supposed to scare me?" "No," she replied. "It's meant to prepare you." Another silence. Caleb stepped aside just enough to gesture toward the porch. "Then come in, but you're going to tell me everything. No more secrets." Rhodes gave a curt nod. "Understood. But if we're going to talk, Mr. Morgan, we do it on the record." She signaled to her team. One agent opened a briefcase, revealing a voice recorder, folders, and a government-issued tablet. Caleb glanced at Tommy, who watched from the porch, wide-eyed. "Go get your mom's old recorder," Caleb said. "Looks like we're about to dig up more than just dirt." The barn might have held an ancient chest, but what had truly been unearthed was far more dangerous. The past, buried and bloody, and still ticking like a live grenade. And now, as black SUVs lined the front yard of the Morgan farm, Caleb knew there was no going back. The war had ended a century and a half ago, but the secrets, they were just getting started. The morning sun cast a pale light over the Morgan farm, but nothing about it felt ordinary anymore. Caleb stood stiffly on his porch, arms crossed, boots firm on the wooden planks, as Agent Madeline Rhodes stepped out of the lead black SUV. Her posture was crisp, her uniform immaculate, but it was her eyes, sharp, calculated, and oddly regretful, that told Caleb this wasn't a routine visit. "I'm not letting anyone touch that chest," Caleb said firmly, before she could even greet him. "Not until I get answers." Madeline paused at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Morgan, I understand this must all seem intrusive, but the contents of that chest are of extreme national significance. We need access." "What I need," Caleb interrupted, his voice quiet but iron-hard, "is to know why someone in military garb was sneaking around my property last night like a damn ghost, and why the hell you're showing up here with no warning, no badges, and no explanations." Her eyes flicked briefly toward the barn. "Let's talk inside." They stepped into the farmhouse kitchen. Caleb didn't offer coffee. He gestured to the chair opposite him, then waited. Madeline sat and opened a leather-bound folder. "The chest you uncovered contains documents lost since the Civil War, specifically since 1865. That year, there was a classified military operation, codename Operation Blue Moon. It was never declassified." "Blue Moon?" Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like some bad bar band, not a Civil War mission." She didn't smile. "It was a Northern contingency plan, a failsafe in the event that certain Confederate strongholds couldn't be taken by force. The operation involved targeted sabotage, explosives, covert sabotage of munitions stockpiles across southern supply chains. Dangerous stuff. "And this has what to do with me?" Caleb asked, though he already felt the weight of the truth sinking in. One of the operatives in charge was Colonel Silas Whitmore. "We believe the chest you found was his personal field archive, maps, encoded logs, cipher keys, and a gold reserve likely used for covert funding. If even half of what's in there is legitimate," she said, voice dropping, "it could rewrite major parts of our understanding of the final year of the war." Caleb leaned back, arms folded. "That's history. Dust and paper. Why send soldiers crawling through my barn in the dead of night?" "Because it's not just history," Madeline said. "One of the journals in that chest contains a specific reference, coordinates matching a long-lost Union outpost that vanished during the war. Every man stationed there, gone. No trace, no explanation, just erased. We believe Whitmore documented exactly what happened to them, and someone, somewhere, doesn't want that to be known." There was a long silence. The clock on the wall ticked loudly. Caleb glanced toward the barn, then back at Madeline. "I ain't letting that chest out of my sight," he said flatly, "and I sure as hell ain't turning it over until someone tells me the whole damn story. Every page of it." Madeline hesitated. "You're asking for information that was buried for a reason." "I'm asking for the truth. If my land's tied up in this, if my family's been sitting on a damn powder keg for generations, I've got a right to know. Otherwise, that chest stays right where it is." She tapped her fingers against the folder. "Off the record," she said finally, "I can walk you through what we know, but in return, you have to agree. No press, no internet, no leaks. If the media gets wind of this before we verify authenticity, it could jeopardize national security." Caleb narrowed his eyes. "So, what you're saying is, you'll give me the truth, as long as I promise not to share it?" Madeline met his gaze evenly. "Exactly. And once we've finished verification, we'll work with you on what can be made public. We're not here to silence you, Mr. Morgan, but we are asking for discretion, until we understand the full scope of what you found." He took a slow breath, the knot in his chest tightening. This wasn't just some old family relic anymore. It was something bigger, darker. "All right," he said at last. "You've got yourself a deal, but I want full transparency, and I want my historian friend involved, Dr. Hallie Jenkins." Madeline raised an eyebrow. "We've heard of her, fine, but she signs the same non-disclosure." "That's between her and you," Caleb said. "Now start talking. Who else knows about this?" She opened the folder again, revealing photos, aged documents, sepia-toned maps, a single blurred photo of what looked like a supply depot burned to ash. Her voice dropped into the calm, practiced cadence of someone who'd done this too many times. Whitmore's records reference a series of sabotage missions disguised as Confederate failures. But here's the kicker. Some of the attacks weren't carried out by the Union, but by an unaffiliated faction, a rogue element interested in prolonging the war. Caleb blinked. "Wait, you're saying there were third parties making the war drag out? On purpose?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, arms dealers, industrial profiteers, even foreign agents. Operation Blue Moon was partially designed to uncover and stop them, but Whitmore disappeared before he could complete his mission. We think the chest was buried just days before he went missing." The floor seemed to tilt under Caleb's feet. "And now," he muttered, "you're all afraid someone still wants to keep it buried." Madeline closed the folder. "Not afraid, just cautious. Secrets like this don't stay secrets forever, and not everyone wants them found." Outside, the black SUVs remained parked at the edge of the gravel road like silent sentinels. Caleb glanced out the window. For a moment, he thought he saw movement near the tree line, just a shadow, maybe, or maybe not. The afternoon sun hung low over Cotton Hollow, draping the Morgan farm in a heavy golden light. Caleb sat at the worn oak table in the farmhouse kitchen, a thick leather-bound journal resting before him. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, a scent that instantly transported him back to a time when Evelyn's laughter still filled these halls. He ran a hand over the cracked cover, his calloused fingers trembling slightly. Evelyn had been gone for 5 years, but somehow she still found ways to reach out to him, to guide him. Tommy Ray had been the one to find the journal, tucked away inside a cedar chest up in the attic, alongside faded quilts and family photographs. "You sure you want to read that now, Pops?" Tommy had asked, his voice hesitant. Caleb had simply nodded, a solemn understanding passing between them. Now, with the house eerily silent, Caleb opened the journal. Evelyn's neat, looping handwriting filled the yellowed pages, each entry a snapshot of her thoughts, her worries, her endless curiosity about the land they called home. Most of the early entries were familiar: reflections on raising Tommy when he was little, notes about lesson plans from her history classes, musings about the rhythms of farm life. But midway through, dated June 1985, a single entry stopped Caleb cold. Today, something strange happened. A man came to the farm, said he was a surveyor from Little Rock, but he wasn't interested in the orchard or the new irrigation plans. No, he kept asking questions about the northeastern corner, the patch we never touch. Grandpa always said to leave it be. The man seemed disappointed when I told him we hadn't plowed it in generations. I watched him drive off, but something about him, the way he looked at that land, like he knew something we didn't. I don't think he was a surveyor at all. Caleb leaned back, heart thudding against his ribs. He closed his eyes, conjuring Evelyn's face, sharp, observant, always picking up on the details most folks missed. She had felt it too. She had known, on some level, that there were secrets buried deeper than any plow could reach. Turning back to the journal, Caleb found more references to the stranger. Over the course of a few months, Evelyn had noted seeing unfamiliar vehicles lingering near the property line, men who seemed out of place in small-town Arkansas. She had even mentioned hearing rumors of government men asking questions at the town records office. Evelyn had suspected something was hidden on Morgan land, but, loyal to her family's wishes and protective of their privacy, she had never pushed beyond quiet observation. "You always were smarter than the rest of us," Caleb muttered aloud, his voice rough with emotion. He set the journal down and turned his attention to the rucksack that held the contents of the unearthed chest. Carefully, reverently, he pulled out the neatly folded documents, the gilded Union Army insignia, the brittle maps. One map, in particular, drew his eye. It wasn't a typical battlefield diagram or property line sketch. This map was rough, hand-drawn, and marked with cryptic notations. One circle, bold and red, encircled the very corner of the field where Caleb had struck metal with his plow. In the margin, barely legible, were 2 words that sent a chill down his spine: Operation Blue Moon. He sat back, stunned. Operation Blue Moon. Digging deeper, Caleb unfolded another document, a letter written in an elegant, slanting script and signed with the initials S.W. He now knew those stood for Colonel Silas Whitmore. "If this chest is found," the letter began, "it means my fears were justified. The plan to sabotage Confederate arsenals in the South was deemed too volatile to be recorded in official dispatches. I have secured these documents with the understanding that knowledge of this operation must remain hidden until the nation is strong enough to face the truth of its own internal betrayals." Caleb's mouth went dry. Betrayals. He read on, his heart hammering louder with each word. The Blue Moon Initiative was a desperate gambit, an attempt to alter the course of the war through the destruction of major Southern supply depots. Hidden sympathizers, planted across key Confederate strongholds, were to orchestrate explosions that would cripple the Southern war machine. The success of this operation would have hastened the end of the conflict, but exposure would have torn the Union cause apart from within. Caleb leaned over the table, breathing hard. So this wasn't just about gold coins or old letters. It was about a hidden campaign, one so incendiary that revealing it could have splintered the fragile United States at its very core. "Good Lord," he whispered. It wasn't treasure he'd unearthed. It was a powder keg, packed not with gunpowder, but with the volatile weight of forgotten history. As dusk crept over the horizon, Caleb gathered the documents in the journal, locking them securely in a battered steel filing cabinet in his workshop. He couldn't risk someone, anyone, getting their hands on this without understanding the stakes. Tommy Ray came in from the porch, the screen door creaking behind him. "Pops," he said, "you might want to come take a look at this." Caleb followed him outside, stepping into the cooling evening air. Tommy pointed out toward the far end of the field, the northeastern corner. There, beyond the line of cottonwoods, a faint glow shimmered in the growing darkness. Not the natural light of a distant house or the wandering beams of a truck. This was different, controlled, focused, like someone or something searching. Caleb narrowed his eyes, instincts kicking in. He reached back, feeling for the reassuring weight of the old rifle he kept by the door. "Stay inside, Tommy," he ordered, voice low and firm. "But Pops, no buts. You lock the door and don't open it unless you hear my voice." Reluctantly, Tommy obeyed, vanishing inside the house. Caleb made his way cautiously across the field, heart pounding in his ears. As he drew closer to the source of the light, the shadows thickened, coiling around him like living things. The beam swung methodically across the furrows of freshly turned earth, illuminating footprints, several sets by the look of them. Whoever they were, they hadn't come alone. Caleb crouched low behind a row of blackberry bushes, watching as two dark figures moved purposefully through the field. One held a handheld scanner, military grade judging by the look of it, sweeping it back and forth across the dirt. The other, tall, broad-shouldered, wore what looked like tactical gear. No insignias, no rank, just the chilling anonymity of professionals who operated in the shadows. Caleb's mind raced. These weren't local treasure hunters or nosy reporters. This was something else entirely. And they were looking for the chest. Or, worse, for him. Slipping silently back toward the house, Caleb felt the weight of his discovery settle fully on his shoulders for the first time. This wasn't just about protecting a piece of family land anymore. This was about surviving long enough to uncover the truth, and deciding what to do with it once he did. The past wasn't done with the Morgans, and by the look of things, the past had come looking for them. The humid Arkansas night had settled like a heavy blanket over Cotton Hollow, thick with the scent of honeysuckle and freshly turned earth. Caleb sat alone on the wraparound porch, a battered lantern casting a warm, flickering light at his feet. In the distance, the rhythmic chirp of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl broke the stillness. The events of the past few days gnawed at his mind like termites working through old wood. Inside, Tommy Ray was busy editing video footage he had taken earlier that day, splicing together clips for a small project he said he might upload online. Caleb had warned him to keep a low profile. Too many eyes on their business would only make things worse, but the boy was stubborn like every Morgan who had come before him. As Caleb nursed a lukewarm cup of coffee, he heard the screen door creak open behind him. "Uncle Caleb," Tommy said, his voice low, urgent. "You need to see this." Caleb turned, frowning. Tommy stood in the doorway, pale and tense, clutching his laptop like it was a life preserver. Without a word, Caleb followed him inside. Tommy set the laptop down on the dining table, his fingers flying over the keyboard to rewind a segment of the footage he'd shot out by the old barn earlier that afternoon. "Watch this part," he whispered. The grainy video showed Caleb's tractor parked in the field, the sun dipping low over the horizon. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then, in the bottom corner of the frame, almost imperceptible, a shadow moved. A figure, tall, hunched slightly, wearing a broad-brimmed hat that threw his face into shadow. He stood just at the tree line, motionless, as if studying the house. Caleb leaned in, squinting. "Pause it," he said. Tommy froze the frame. Caleb felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. "Who the hell is that?" Tommy asked, voice shaking slightly. Caleb exhaled through his nose, thinking, "I don't know, but they ain't here to admire the scenery." Tommy clicked forward frame by frame. The figure eventually melted back into the trees, disappearing without a trace. Caleb clenched his fists on the edge of the table. This wasn't random. Somebody was watching them. Before Caleb could speak, the old landline phone on the wall rang, its shrill bell cutting through the house like a knife. Tommy jumped. Caleb's heart hammered in his chest as he crossed the room. He picked up the receiver slowly. "Hello?" There was a beat of silence, then a voice, distorted, low, and unmistakably threatening. "Leave it alone. The voice growled, "Or you'll wish you had." The line went dead. Caleb stood there, staring at the phone, the dial tone buzzing in his ear. He slowly hung up and turned to find Tommy staring at him, wide-eyed. "What did they say?" Tommy whispered. Caleb wiped a hand down his face, feeling the sweat bead on his forehead despite the coolness of the night air. "They told us to back off." A heavy silence filled the kitchen. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a trap. The next morning, Caleb stood at the kitchen sink, sipping coffee and staring out over the fields. His mind churned with possibilities. Who was that man? How had they found out about the Ruang so fast? And more importantly, what exactly were they willing to do to keep its secrets buried? Madeline Rhodes arrived just after sunrise, pulling up in an unmarked black SUV. She stepped out wearing jeans and a light jacket, but her rigid posture and scanning eyes made it clear she hadn't come for a social call. Caleb met her halfway down the driveway. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. "I figured," Madeline replied grimly. They retreated to the porch, Caleb waving Tommy back into the house with a stern look. This conversation wasn't meant for young ears. Caleb told her about the shadowy figure, the phone call, and the lingering feeling that Cotton Hollow was no longer just sleepy farmland. Madeline listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with each passing detail. "This isn't protocol," she muttered under her breath when Caleb finished. "Not even close." "You think it's someone from your side?" Caleb asked, his voice low and steady. Madeline hesitated just a second too long. "There are factions," she admitted carefully. "Elements inside certain agencies that believe some things are better left buried. This discovery, it threatens a lot of carefully crafted narratives." Caleb barked a humorless laugh. "You mean it threatens their tidy little version of history?" Madeline didn't deny it. "You need to understand," she said, leaning forward, voice urgent. "There are people with a lot of power, and no conscience, who will do whatever it takes to make sure those documents never see the light of day." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of the moment settle squarely on his shoulders. "So, what do we do?" Madeline's eyes hardened. "We be smart. We stay one step ahead, and we don't trust anyone we don't absolutely have to." She paused, studying him. "That includes some of my own people." Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the hills and long shadows stretched across the fields, Caleb took a slow walk along the fence line. Every rustle of the wind in the trees made him glance over his shoulder. Every creak of the old barn made his heart skip a beat. The peace he'd always found on this land was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of being watched, of unseen dangers lurking just beyond his line of sight. Inside the house, Tommy and Caleb double-checked the locks on every door and window. They moved the Ruang into the crawl space beneath the kitchen floor, covering it with old plywood and a threadbare rug. They said little as they worked, but an unspoken agreement passed between them. They weren't backing down. Whatever secrets that Ruang held, whatever dangers lurked in the darkness, they were in it now, deep, and there was no turning back. As Caleb settled into his creaky armchair that night, rifle propped nearby and one wary eye on the windows, he felt the old farmhouse wrap around him like armor. He wasn't just protecting a few pieces of gold or a dusty journal. He was protecting the truth, even if it meant standing alone against whatever was coming, and from the look of things, it was coming fast. The morning after the shadowed figure had appeared, a heavy, restless stillness settled over the Morgan farm. The sun climbed slow and dull through a thick veil of humidity, and Caleb felt the weight of yesterday's revelations pressing down harder than ever. Madeline Rhodes sat across the kitchen table from him, a cup of black coffee cooling in her hands. Her uniform was crisp, but her eyes looked tired, wary. Tommy Ray hovered near the doorway, pretending to scroll on his phone but clearly listening in. "There's something you need to understand, Caleb," Madeline began, her voice low but firm. "If the information in that chest is authenticated and released to the public, it won't just be another interesting Civil War story. It'll rewrite the way this nation views that war." Caleb rubbed his weathered hands over his face. "You're saying this isn't just some forgotten diary or a bunch of old maps?" Madeline shook her head. "No, sir, not by a long shot." She pulled a thin file from her satchel and slid it across the table. Caleb hesitated, then opened it. Inside were high-resolution photographs of several pages from the documents he'd unearthed. He immediately recognized the spidery handwriting of Colonel Silas Whitmore. Madeline tapped a particular page with her gloved finger. "This, right here, is why everyone is so nervous." Caleb squinted, reading slowly. At the request of Northern industrialists and financiers, operations were initiated to prolong hostilities between the Union and Confederacy. Strategic engagements were manipulated, supplies were deliberately sabotaged. The goal, to ensure continued production and profit from the war effort. He looked up, heart pounding. "You're saying somebody didn't want the war to end?" "Not somebody," Madeline said quietly. "A lot of somebodies. Powerful interests who made fortunes off the bloodshed." The words hit Caleb like a blow to the chest. His whole life, he'd been taught about the Civil War as a tragic but righteous conflict, a battle for the soul of the nation. Now he was being told it had been prolonged for money, for greed. "There's more," Madeline said, pulling out another document. This one was a field report, stamped confidential, detailing meetings between Union and Confederate intermediaries, not to negotiate peace, but to coordinate certain battles and supply delays, all under the table. "If this goes public," Madeline said, "the romantic notions of the lost cause and even parts of the Union victory narrative will crumble. It'll challenge the very mythology America has built around the Civil War for over 150 years. Caleb sat back heavily in his chair, staring blankly at the papers. "Why now?" he muttered. "Why find all this now?" Madeline's gaze softened. "Maybe it's time, Caleb. Maybe the country is finally ready to face the truth." The screen door creaked as Tommy Ray slipped outside, sensing the gravity of the conversation. Caleb watched him go, heart aching. What kind of legacy was he about to leave that boy? Madeline leaned in, her tone earnest. "Listen, you have a decision to make. We can suppress this, classify it, bury it again. Nobody would blame you. Or," Caleb finished for her, "we let it out and deal with the fallout." Madeline nodded. For a long time, Caleb said nothing. The clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere outside, a cicada buzzed. "You think my great-great-granddaddy knew?" Caleb finally asked. "Knew he was sitting on all this when he passed this land down?" "Hard to say," Madeline replied. "Maybe he did. Maybe that's why that piece of land was always off limits." Caleb thought of Evelyn, of her careful notes and cryptic journal entries. She had sensed something buried beneath the soil, something more than just old bones and broken memories. His gut twisted. How could he protect the land, the legacy, and the truth all at once? Later that evening, after Madeline had left to make her reports to Washington, Caleb found himself wandering the fields. The last light of day slanted low across the rows of parched crops. His boots crunched dry earth beneath him as he made his way to the old well. He remembered his father telling him stories as a boy, tales of honor and sacrifice, of Morgan men standing tall through drought and war and hardship, tales that now felt tainted, not because they were lies, but because they were only half the story. "What do I do, Evie?" Caleb whispered into the wind. "How do I carry this?" He sat on the edge of the well, the stone still warm from the day's sun. His eyes scanned the horizon where the stars were beginning to prick through the purple sky. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and fields, a nation was living under a version of history that wasn't whole. Could he, a stubborn old farmer with more debts than dollars, really change that? Could he afford not to? The buzzing of his phone in his pocket broke the silence. It was Tommy Ray. "Grandpa," the boy's voice crackled through the line. "I just posted that video of the chest again. It's getting crazy views. There's reporters messaging me." Caleb closed his eyes. The genie was already halfway out of the bottle. Maybe the real question wasn't whether the truth would come out. Maybe it was whether Caleb Morgan had the courage to stand by it when it did. He rose from the well, slowly, dusted off his jeans, and started back toward the house, the stars blazing overhead like silent witnesses to the burden he now carried. Whatever happened next, he wouldn't be running from it. Not Caleb Morgan, not a son of Cotton Hollow. The truth had waited long enough. The morning air was thick with humidity, hanging heavy over the Morgan farm like an invisible shroud. Caleb stood on the porch, mug of black coffee cradled in both hands, staring out across the fields. The weight of the past few days was pressing down on him harder than any Arkansas summer heat ever could. Somewhere beyond those rolling fields, buried under a century and a half of soil and secrets, his family's legacy was being rewritten, and the world was starting to notice. He heard the crunch of tires on gravel before he saw the dusty sedan pulling up the driveway. Dr. Hallie Jenkins stepped out, adjusting the strap of her well-worn satchel and shielding her eyes against the sun. She looked exactly how Caleb remembered from Evelyn's descriptions, sharp-eyed, serious, and with an energy that seemed to crackle around her like static. "Morning, Caleb," she called out as she approached. "Hope you don't mind me coming out this early." "Not at all," Caleb said, extending a hand. "Been waiting on you." They shook hands, and Caleb led her toward the barn where the rickety old table was still set up, the contents of the riddle box chest carefully spread out and cataloged. Hallie set down her satchel and pulled out a pair of white cotton gloves and a jeweler's loupe. "Let's see what your wife left behind for us," she murmured. For the next 2 hours, Hallie meticulously examined the documents, journals, coins, and maps. Caleb watched in silence, feeling like an intruder at his own table. Every now and then, Hallie would mutter to herself things like "incredible preservation" or "primary source material, untouched." Finally, she sat back, pulled off her gloves, and let out a low whistle. "Caleb," she said, voice low and measured, "this is the real deal. These documents, they're not just authentic. They're a historical gold mine. You've got first-hand accounts, military correspondences, encrypted maps, even currency issued to Union intelligence officers. This," she said, tapping a finger on one of the journals, "could change the way we understand the Civil War, especially covert operations in the South." Caleb exhaled slowly, part relief, part dread. "Thought maybe it was all just some fool's tale," he muttered. "Maybe I was making a mountain out of a molehill." "No," Hallie said firmly. "If anything, you've been underestimating it." Before Caleb could respond, the buzzing of his phone cut through the thick barn air. He fished it out of his pocket and frowned. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "Mr. Morgan," a clipped voice said on the other end. "This is Robert Tate with the Cotton Hollow Gazette. We've gotten word about a historical discovery on your property. Mind if I come by for an interview?" Caleb's heart sank. "Where'd you hear that?" he barked, sharper than intended. "Off the record," Tate said. "Small town. Word gets around. You know how it is." "Ain't nothing confirmed," Caleb growled. "I'll call you if that changes." He hung up before Tate could respond. Hallie raised an eyebrow. "That's not good." "No," Caleb agreed. "It ain't." By noon, 2 more calls had come in, one from a regional news outlet, another from a blogger who specialized in hidden histories. Somehow, someone had leaked that there was something significant brewing out at the Morgan place. Caleb felt his stomach knot tighter with each call. Later that afternoon, as he and Hallie sat on the porch sipping sweet tea, Caleb wrestled with the growing pressure. He couldn't deny it anymore. The genie was out of the bottle. Even if he wanted to keep the discovery private, that option was slipping through his fingers faster than Mississippi River mud. "You got decisions to make, Caleb," Hallie said gently. "Ones that ain't easy." "You're telling me," Caleb muttered. He rubbed his temples, feeling every bit of his 62 years. "If you hand everything over to the military quietly, maybe they keep a lid on it," Hallie continued. "But if the story breaks wide open without your say, and it will, you lose all control." Caleb thought of Evelyn, of the legacy she'd tried so hard to preserve, and of Tommy Ray, wide-eyed and hopeful, believing in his family's honor. He stood up, pacing the length of the porch. His boots thudded heavily against the weathered boards. "I don't trust them," he said finally. "The government, media, none of them. But this story don't belong to just me. It belongs to all of us. Folks ought to know the truth, the whole truth, not some sanitized version." Hallie smiled, a slow, approving thing. "Then you'd better make damn sure you set the terms," she said. That evening, Caleb made the call. He got a hold of Agent Madeline Rhodes, who answered on the second ring. "Ms. Rhodes," Caleb said without preamble, "I'm willing to cooperate. You can take the materials, study 'em, secure 'em, but I got conditions." There was a pause. "I'm listening," Madeline said cautiously. "1," Caleb said, ticking it off on a rough finger. "Everything gets officially authenticated by independent experts, not just your folks." "Agreed," Madeline said. 2, Caleb continued. "Ain't none of it gets buried away in some damn government vault. Once it's verified, it gets made public, all of it." Another pause, longer this time. "That's complicated," Madeline said carefully. "There are national security considerations." "Ain't negotiable," Caleb cut in. He could hear her breathing on the other end. Finally, she sighed. "I'll take it to my superiors. No promises, but I'll fight for it." "Good," Caleb said. "You tell 'em this ain't just about some farmer digging up junk. This is history, and it ain't theirs to keep secret." When he hung up, Caleb leaned back against the porch railing, feeling the tension bleed out of him like a slow leak. The choice had been made. He would not be the man who let the truth be buried again. The sun was setting behind the hills, casting the fields in gold and deep purple. Caleb stood there long after dark, staring out at the land that had held his family up for 4 generations. It would hold them up through this too. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. The next morning broke with an uneasy stillness over Cotton Hollow, the kind that made Caleb's instincts tighten like a drumhead. The clouds hung heavy and low, casting a somber gray over the Morgan farm. Caleb stood on his porch with a chipped mug of black coffee, feeling the weight of decisions he'd made and the ones still looming. He hadn't even taken his second sip when the first black SUV rolled down the dusty driveway, kicking up a trail of gravel and dread. Then another, and another. It wasn't like the earlier visit. This time, it was orchestrated with the kind of precision that screamed official business. No casual uniforms, no hidden glances. This was a full-on operation. Behind the SUVs came a matte green military transport truck, unmarked but obvious to anyone with half a brain. Caleb counted 4 heavily armed soldiers stepping out first, scanning the perimeter with grim efficiency. From the lead SUV emerged Agent Madeline Rhodes, her demeanor even sharper than before. She strode up the steps with the authority of someone carrying the full weight of Washington on her back. "Mr. Morgan," she greeted, her voice clipped. "We have official orders." She handed him a thick folder embossed with government seals Caleb had never seen before. Flipping through, he caught enough to know it was the real deal. Authorization from the Department of Defense, the National Archives, and, God help him, an executive office memorandum. They were here to take the chest. Caleb gave a slow nod, swallowing the bitter taste rising in his throat. "So, this is it," he said quietly. "You're taking it." "Securing it," Madeline corrected. "For proper preservation and study. You'll be fully briefed on every step." Behind her, soldiers in tactical gear moved with robotic precision, entering the barn where the chest had been kept. They worked in silence, securing the old trunk in a padded containment crate, marked with hazard labels and high-security clearance tags. Tommy Ray, hovering by the fence line with a handheld camcorder slung around his neck, caught Caleb's eye. There was a quick, almost imperceptible nod between them, an unspoken understanding they'd shared since that first night. While the soldiers were busy, Tommy had slipped into the workshop earlier and finished backing up everything. Every photo, every document scan, every hand-drawn map they had found inside the chest was now safely copied onto a portable hard drive stashed in the bottom of his battered backpack. As the containment team carefully hoisted the sealed crate onto the back of the transport truck, Caleb's stomach twisted. Watching it disappear felt like a piece of his own soul was being hauled away. He knew he had made the right decision, but it didn't make it any easier. Once the convoy was loaded and secured, Madeline approached Caleb again. "We understand the personal nature of this discovery," she said, her tone softer now. "You'll have full access to the materials once they're verified and processed, and you'll be credited in any public releases." Caleb just nodded, his voice caught somewhere between resignation and defiance. Madeline hesitated, then lowered her voice. "For what it's worth, Mr. Morgan, not everyone wanted this handled respectfully. There were forces at play who preferred this stayed buried, literally and figuratively. You did the right thing, even if it doesn't feel like it today. The words landed heavier than she probably intended. He watched until the last vehicle disappeared down the long dirt road, the dust hanging in the air like a ghostly veil. Then he turned back toward the house, where Tommy was waiting, shifting from foot to foot, like he had a secret burning a hole in his pocket. Inside, in the safety of the kitchen, where Evelyn's old clock ticked steadily on the wall, Tommy finally spoke. "Uncle Caleb," he said, pulling the hard drive from his bag and placing it carefully on the table. "I found something else." Caleb leaned in, squinting as Tommy pulled up a series of images on his laptop, high-res scans of documents from the chest. Among them, one in particular caught his eye, a worn leather-bound notebook with intricate, almost obsessive scribbles along the margins. "It's a cipher," Tommy said excitedly. "Some kind of code. I ran it through a decryption tool. Took me all night." He clicked again, and a set of coordinates popped up on the screen, overlaid on a topographical map of the Morgan property. Caleb felt his heart hammer against his ribs. The spot the coordinates pointed to wasn't far, just a few hundred yards from where they had found the chest. "You're telling me," Caleb said slowly, "there's more?" Tommy grinned, that mischievous spark that reminded Caleb so much of Evelyn lighting up his young face. "I'm telling you," Tommy said, "there's something buried under the old well." Caleb let out a long breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. Just when he thought this nightmare, or adventure, was over, the land proved it still had secrets left to give. As twilight fell over the farm, the old well stood silhouetted against the horizon like a dark eye, staring back at them. Tomorrow, Caleb thought. Tomorrow they'd find out what else Cotton Hollow had hidden all these years. And deep down, he knew whatever was buried beneath that ground wasn't just going to rewrite family history. It was going to challenge everything he thought he knew about the past, about loyalty, and about the price of keeping secrets in a country still trying to understand itself. The summer sun beat down mercilessly on Cotton Hollow as Caleb Morgan, Tommy Ray, and Dr. Hallie Jenkins made their way toward the back end of the property where the oldest part of the Morgan farm sat, forgotten, weathered, and quietly holding its secrets. The old well, lined with crumbling stones and a splintered wooden frame, hadn't been used in decades. Most folks around town figured it had gone dry years ago. Caleb, however, had always had a nagging feeling about it, an instinct he couldn't explain, the same one that had stirred deep inside him the day he unearthed the iron chest. Tommy led the way, a sturdy shovel over his shoulder and a laptop tucked under his arm. "The coordinates match, Uncle Caleb," he said, excitement buzzing in his voice. "Right here. It's got to be under the old well." Caleb nodded, his hand brushing over the rough stone. "Well," he said, allowing a small smile, "no turning back now." Hallie adjusted her wide-brimmed hat and glanced around, ever watchful. "We need to work carefully," she advised. "If the documents survived this long, they're probably delicate as a spider's web." With no ceremony, they set to work. Caleb and Tommy took turns prying away the warped wooden slats, revealing the gaping darkness beneath. Dust and the smell of damp earth rose up as they pulled the rotten cover free. Hallie directed a flashlight beam into the blackness, revealing a shallow layer of water at the bottom, no more than a few inches deep, and something else. "There!" Tommy cried, pointing. A glint of greenish metal, barely visible through the muck. It took nearly 2 hours of careful digging and winching to haul it out. A long, heavy copper tube, about 3 feet in length, sealed tight at both ends. Caleb's hands trembled slightly as he lifted it onto the ground. Time had worn its surface with patches of verdigris, but it remained intact, a testament to the craftsmanship of another era. Hallie crouched beside it, examining the cylinder. "This looks like a military-grade preservation tube, probably used for critical documents. Or secrets too dangerous to trust to anyone," Caleb muttered. Together they pried open the end cap, the seal releasing with a hiss. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a sheaf of aged papers. Caleb gingerly unfolded them, heart hammering in his chest. The first page bore a familiar signature, bold yet elegant: Abraham Lincoln. Hallie gasped audibly, her academic restraint crumbling for a moment. Tommy stood wide-eyed, frozen. Caleb sat back on his heels, feeling the enormity of the moment settle over him like a lead blanket. With trembling hands, he read the letter aloud. To Colonel Silas Whitmore, if ever this nation finds itself once more at a crossroads, if ever the truth you now safeguard threatens to rend rather than mend our union, then I implore you, preserve it still. Reveal it only when the people are prepared to receive it, when understanding has grown beyond passion and wisdom beyond grievance. Until then, trust in time. Abraham Lincoln, April 2nd, 1865. Silence fell over the small group as the words echoed through the empty field, words that had waited more than a century and a half to be heard again. Tommy finally broke the stillness. So, he knew. Lincoln knew it might be too much for the country to handle. Caleb nodded, his throat tight. And he trusted Whitmore, and, by extension, us, to know when that time had come. Hallie wiped at the corner of her eye, pretending it was just dust. This isn't just history, she said quietly. This is legacy. The copper tube contained more, additional correspondences between Lincoln and Colonel Whitmore, tactical maps, and personal reflections written in Whitmore's own hand. They painted a complex, sometimes painful portrait of the Civil War's final months, and hinted at truths the victors had chosen to bury in favor of simpler, more palatable narratives. 2 months later, under the soaring glass roof of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., Caleb stood awkwardly at the edge of a small stage. All around him, journalists, historians, and dignitaries gathered in anticipation. In the center of the exhibit hall, under tight security and carefully controlled lighting, sat the copper tube, the iron chest, and the meticulously preserved documents they had contained, the artifacts that had changed everything. A large banner overhead read, "Beneath the Fields, Secrets of the Civil War, Unearthed by an American Farmer." Caleb still couldn't quite believe it. When he had first struck that chest with his tractor blade, all he had worried about was keeping the farm from going under. Now he was being hailed as a national hero. The farmer who saved a hidden piece of America's soul, one newspaper had called him. A woman with a crisp blazer and a press badge hurried up to him, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Morgan, you're up next. The director will introduce you." Caleb tugged at the collar of his best, and only, suit, feeling like a cat in a bathtub. He glanced over to where Tommy Ray and Hallie stood, giving him thumbs up. Tommy, wearing a necktie for the first time in his life, looked like he was about to bust with pride. Hallie, always composed, gave him a small, reassuring nod. The director of the Smithsonian, a dignified woman with silver hair and a commanding presence, stepped up to the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying across the hushed room, "today we celebrate a discovery that reshapes our understanding of one of the most pivotal periods in American history. But more than that, we celebrate the spirit of stewardship, the idea that sometimes history finds its protectors in the most unlikely places." She turned to Caleb, beckoning him forward. "Today we recognize Mr. Caleb Morgan, a fourth-generation farmer from Cotton Hollow, Arkansas, as a true guardian of our national story." A round of applause rose, growing stronger, filling the hall. Caleb walked to the podium, his boots heavy against the polished floor, and took a deep breath. "I ain't much for speeches," he began, a ripple of laughter running through the crowd. "But I reckon if history taught me anything these past months, it's that the past ain't just words in a book. It's blood, sweat, hope, mistakes, and sometimes secrets." He paused, scanning the room. "And maybe, just maybe, the truth has its own timing. Maybe it's not about digging it up the minute you can. Maybe it's about knowing when folks are ready to hear it." Caleb glanced toward the artifacts and the copper tube that had traveled so far, waiting for the right hands to open it. "My wife, Evelyn, she'd have loved this," he said softly. "She believed history was like seeds. You plant them, you tend them, and someday something good'll grow." Another round of applause swelled, heartfelt and sustained. Later, as Caleb wandered the exhibit, he paused at the letter, Lincoln's letter, displayed under protective glass. He felt Tommy come up beside him. "You think he knew?" Tommy asked, Lincoln, I mean, knew it would take this long? Caleb smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. Maybe. Maybe he figured some things are bigger than one lifetime, bigger than winning or losing a war. Tommy nodded thoughtfully. Guess that makes us part of it now. We always were, Caleb said, clapping his nephew on the shoulder. We just didn't know it yet. Outside the museum, the sun was setting over the Washington skyline, gilding the monuments in soft, golden light. Caleb paused at the steps, feeling the weight of the past and the hope of the future balanced in his chest. Whatever storms still waited, whatever debates the revelations might spark, he had done his part. He had answered history's call, not as a soldier or a scholar, but as a simple man who chose to do the right thing. And sometimes, Caleb thought with a quiet smile, that's how the biggest chapters of history are written, one steady hand at a time. As the sun sets on Caleb Morgan's journey, we're left with a powerful reminder. Sometimes, history isn't just written by generals, kings, or politicians. It's written by folks like Caleb, people who choose to stand up, to protect what's true, even when the world says it's easier to look away. Here at this channel, we believe in those kinds of stories. Stories about everyday heroes, about forgotten corners of America where the soil still holds secrets and the past still echoes if you're quiet enough to listen. If Caleb's story moved you, if it made you think a little deeper about the truth, about legacy, about what it means to stand your ground, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Tell us what part of Caleb's journey resonated with you the most. Was it his grit, his stubborn hope, his refusal to let history stay buried? Your voice matters here, just like his did out there in those fields. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join this growing community. We're just getting started. There are so many more stories like Caleb's, hidden in small towns, tucked away in family attics, buried under forgotten fields, waiting to be unearthed, waiting to be told. In the coming weeks, we'll be diving into more true stories of everyday people who stumbled into extraordinary moments of farmers, folks who, just like Caleb, proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's just the steady, stubborn whisper of, I won't give up. By subscribing, you won't just be watching stories. You'll be keeping these legacies alive. You'll be part of honoring the spirit that built this country from the ground up. One truth, one voice, one heartbeat at a time. So, stay tuned. Because if you thought Caleb Morgan's fields held secrets, wait until you hear what's buried just down the road. The past isn't done speaking. And together, we're going to make sure it's heard. I'll see you in the next story.